This is part 2 of our stocks in a bubble. In part 1, we said that 2 of 3 factors were in play that resembled the dot-com bubble, and I believe we just saw a glimpse of the third. The 3 factors were 1. Widespread belief that a technological innovation was going to change the world. 2. A broad rise in all companies related to that technology, many of them that were ahead of their time and not able to grow sustainably outside of super easy financing conditions. And 3. The factor we hadn't seen yet, a tightening in liquidity. Yesterday we got news of some regional bank troubles. When I saw the headline, my first thought was,
assistant to the regional manager.
Same thing.
And my second thought was that it was probably just another Silicon Valley Bank type issue like we had in March 2023, which was essentially an isolated incident of reckless risk-taking. The market ended up being fine after the Fed introduced a liquidity facility. This case may be different. After the 2008 financial crisis, regulators made it more difficult for banks to do risky lending, which is where the bigger profit margins lie. This pushed the lending market into the shadow banking sector, which is just kind of a cool way to say private credit. So instead of you borrowing money from Bank of America, you now borrow from some 20-year-old Stanford dropout running an AI fintech lending firm in between lines of creatine. Banks, of course, wanted to partake in the private credit boom, so they would loan money to these institutions, lend money to private lenders who then would lend to risky borrowers. Same but different. I have covered this world briefly on days 53 and 54. So the news yesterday was that some regional banks lent money to some lenders that either ended up bankrupt or significantly marked down. The big question is if this is an isolated incident or a more widespread issue within private credit. To me, it's likely that this leads to some broad tightening in lending conditions, which is another way of saying it's going to become a bit harder to borrow money. Bank lending is what creates and destroys money in the economy and affects liquidity. I think a clear sign that this is being taken seriously is that we got an about-face headline on tariffs today. It's one thing to negotiate with China while the stock market is hitting all-time highs, but you don't play hardball when we just saw a glimpse of the third bubble factor, tightening in liquidity. What I'm doing now is watching how these regional bank stocks perform. We've created a watch list of the top 20 regional banks on Tickup, which you can follow, and it will feed into the Everything Tracker to notify you if there's any major moves. I'll also be watching out for the next Senior Loan Officer Opinion Survey, which tells us if banks are pulling back on lending. And finally, I'll be watching out for the US dollar strengthening. If we start to see that without corresponding news, it may be a sign that we are seeing global liquidity tightening. That can be a lot to stay on top of for most people, but we cover this analysis for free on the Tickup app, and I always post there first. I'll do a part 3 of this series soon. As I've mentioned on the last few Macro Mondays, I've reduced my exposure to consumer cyclical names, and I'm now starting to trade more tactically. This is not financial advice. Always do your own research.